what will be your approach towards revenue management in the current times as well as post COVID-19 period? One option is my approach doesn't change and I continue to approach revenue management the same way as before. Kind of relevant, right? Because at the end of the day, the fundamentals of revenue management not necessarily change. So that's one of your options. Or I will have to look at things differently and understand how I can manage my pricing differently with, remember, a bigger focus on profitability. So that's the poll question, for our audience. I can see we already have around close to 30 people viewing this session. So please go ahead and put in your answers. And in the meantime, I'll go for my first question to Professor Kimes. So there it is. Okay. So Professor, the COVID-19 crisis has obviously kind of brought the entire travel and tourism industry to a virtual standstill. Now, the fear is that as we move into the recovery phase, our industry will face a problem that has been the hottest topic ever, which is how do we price, the basic fundamental question. How do we generate revenue from scratch? And I think most importantly, a question that has been asked to me several times in the last couple of months is how do we create new revenue? Now, you have obviously spent years researching on this subject in revenue management, and I've seen how the discipline has evolved over these years, if it has, across different regions. So do you think, given the current situation, it's time for our industry to actually hit the reset button for revenue management and think differently on how we approach the subject? Over to you.
I think it is time, and again, good. I guess it's now good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here. But I think it's time to hit the reset button. I think that the revenue management principles are still the same. We have capacity constraints, and they're different right now, and some of them we have no control over. And the whole thing is, how can I use that capacity as profitably as I possibly can? I think that over the years is that it's sort of still there, but I think we've started to make things too complex, and we've lost sight of what the basics are. And now is really the time to be thinking about the basics. How can you, given these capacity constraints, how can you generate revenue? And I think that the old way that we've been doing things, the way we've been doing things before, it was great, but it was more of an inventory management approach, whereas now it's much more on the pricing side.
Okay, interesting. Apurva, I'll actually come to you. You're part of the industry, but also look at the industry from a very different lens. Now, having worked with various partners, including both airlines, hotels, car rental companies as well, what are your views on the same? And I'll also actually kind of ask a subset of the question to you, which is, if we are to press that reset button, how can technology really enable us to press that button and to kind of get us ready for that new age of revenue management?
Sure. So basically, I think traditional revenue management was largely focused on pricing rooms and rooms revenue. But considering the unprecedented COVID crisis at hand, I think RM will really move towards total revenue management, or TRM. Package pricing will become very important because guests would want all-inclusive rates with meal plans and packages. They would really hesitate to step out to eat somewhere else. As such, MAP or all-inclusive packages will become more important. How do you really maximize revenue from ancillary services is going to become really important. So how do you monetize pickups and drops? Because guests would be very wary about landing at the airport and taking a third-party cab to get to the hotel. So hotels will need to become more all-inclusive providers and think about monetizing the whole package. And the challenge is going to be, how many line items do you create in your rate plan for each of these individual amenities versus really packaging it as an all-inclusive rate with everything included, with the assurance of health, safety, and hygiene. So that's going to be a fundamental change. Cars is a very, very interesting topic, and thank you for asking that. A lot of car companies basically make more money out of selling and buying cars than actually renting out. So 60-70% profit of large companies comes from trading in cars, buying second-hand cars, selling second-hand cars, leasing to companies like Uber and Lyft. So drivers who want to ride Uber lease cars, right? And that business is something which will recover faster than their own car business. And they are adding on things like insurance and are you going to pay extra if it is cleaned, disinfected? So interesting world ahead.
I think good that you talked about that piece, and you talked about that whole airport transfer piece, which I've also kind of thought through a couple of times. And it's interesting that a lot of our hotels not necessarily have those assets on their own, right? You don't really own all your airport transfer cars, and if car rental companies are actually venturing out, maybe it's time for hotels to actually reach out to these rental companies and say, pick up 5 long lease term cars, which then can actually be used for your airport transfers.
Absolutely.
It's not always a reason to buy your own assets. That whole asset light strategy that we talk about in our hotel industry, it can actually work for your car rentals as well. So interesting that you talked about that. But I'll actually go to people who are on the ground in the industry. So Sharad and Sam, you've heard about what Professor said and what Apurva mentioned. And I'm sure you're doing a lot of your own talking and preaching within your own industry and your own companies as well. What are your thought process? I'll go first to you, Sharad, to give your views around the subject.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Tarandeep, for having me for the ROC at Home event. I kind of agree with Professor Kimes. The fundamentals are not going to change when it comes to revenue management. The fundamentals are going to remain, but the pricing is going to have a dramatic shift. Whether it recognizes the environment that it is operating today, which is either you're dealing more with local business, you're dealing more with region-based business or a country-based business, or are you dealing still with international? Or a customer base that was predominantly coming from outside your own environment, that price point will change. So a dramatic shift in the mix of customers, a dramatic shift in which segments a hotel or a business caters to, that is going to define how your pricing eventually shapes. So whether you try and package it or you try and create a more robust ancillary revenue stream, it all depends on who's really now buying those products. And again, on the propensity of a customer to buy. And that would change from one region to another. So suddenly you will find that the transparency that existed in the industry could also disappear for some time as everybody is trying to recover from this post-COVID situation. And I do believe the revenue management function requires a reset completely. I think you're going to talk more about it later, but this was just in regards to pricing, but definitely the function is now at the time that it requires a reset, and for the industry to take notice of that.
Thanks, Sharad. Sam, what do you think about it?
Hi, Taran. Thank you for having me on this panel. Good afternoon, everyone. Listen, I think pricing is going to change. And the way it's going to change, it's going to depend more on market intelligence. So what we used to do in the last 5, 6, 7 years, pricing was based on demand. So we just look at demand and we saw we had a peak or we had not enough demand, and we were adjusting our pricing accordingly, via machine or not machine. So it was done that way. I think today, post COVID-19, we need to understand more where the customers are coming from. We need to look at the booking channels. We need to look at nationalities. We need to look at the type of guest, family, couples, singles. And we need to pricing should be all of these should be a component of pricing now. And we need to see how we can adapt and shift and see how we can capture this demand coming to us. We know we don't want to sound pessimistic, but this is going to take longer than expected to recover back to normal level demand. And now it's time to get into very specific details about who's booking, who's staying, who's coming to us, type of guest, nationalities, which countries are open, and adjust accordingly. And this is going to be the main pricing component, I believe.
Sam, you make a very good point. When you talk about, I need to know more about who is buying it and, when are they buying, it actually comes down to data and analytics and the insights. And I think that's where we've seen in the past, yes, there are hotel companies which have actually invested on that side of the business, on the data and analytics side, but not necessarily they kind of, look at the things in that same lens across the industry. And I think it's time. So if I go back to that whole reset phrase, I think it's time to reset more on how we look at revenue management in the wider perspective. How do we bring in the whole data and analytics into that picture and make sure that all the decisions taken are more informed decisions. I don't have to price it at a particular price because I used to price it the way in the past. Now that's what is going to change a lot. And I was reading an interesting article which was talking more around how there'll be a lot of fluidity in the terms of the data points that we are going to be getting. So you might look at something today, you will make a decision, and it might change very fast 1 week down the line or 10 days down the line. And I've seen that. We've been doing recovery plans, and you can make n number of recovery plans, but the bottom line is you don't know what government is planning. You're still dependent on how government is going to change those lockdowns and borders controls and all those things. So you make a very, very interesting point around that. Angie, can we get the poll results on the screen just to see what our attendees are thinking about? Okay, so there it is. Yeah, I think everybody is pretty much keen to understand how my pricing is to work differently in the new world, and more importantly, they want to start thinking about the profitability piece, which is very good. Apurva, I'll come back to, in fact, before I go back to Apurva on that question, maybe I'll put in another poll question over here, which is, and if you can put the second question that we have for the audience, and then I can continue asking Apurva that piece. Yes, so there it is. How confident are you of your RMS to manage yield and pricing in the new world? We've been talking more about pricing in the previous question, but if you are a decent size hotel company, you are connected to some sort of an RMS. So that's where RMS controls pricing. So the question is, are you confident about your RMS? Options are, I'm confident of the recommendations coming in, or I will use it, but I know more in current times on what's happening around me, or I've asked for a rebuild of my RMS. And fourth option, I'm really worried, but I haven't started the discussion on this subject. So while audience comes back to us on their thought process on this question, Apurva, I want to go back to you. Are you confident that RMS, and I'm not necessarily asking more around the rate gain piece, but across this segment of the industry that you work for, will it be able to evolve in time? Or are we saying that in the battle of man and machine, man is going to have an upper hand for a while? You're on mute.
Thank you for asking that question, Tarandeep. So I think it's a classical debate, which is industries. So like in New York, I used to live in New York, we had robo lawyers. $5, you could upload your parking ticket, and the robo lawyer would challenge the parking ticket, and their success rate was almost 600-700 BPS above normal human lawyers, because they would pull in weather data from the API. They would exactly know where your car is parked. They would automatically, using machine learning, look at your judgments. But has it replaced all the lawyers? I don't think so. So I think that it's not going to be man versus machine in revenue management. It's going to be a combination of man and machine, where a lot of routine things. So, RMs, you typically had the revenue management model was very on-site heavy in expensive locations. Then you had cluster revenue managers. That expensive model, I think, for a change, and I already see some of our customers changing it. We work with almost 50-60,000 hotels on rate shopping and revenue management. That model is changing, and you have different kinds of RM systems with different maturity. You have simple rule-based systems, which are nothing but glorified Excel sheets with a UI. Then you have cognitive revenue management systems which use ML AI and which use multivariate data. So I think gradually, at least the large hotel chains will move to a man plus machine combination, where revenue managers who are very experienced like you or Sharad will focus on the strategy and will really focus on change management, working with partners like car rentals and other things, while the routine part of RM, which anyway should be very automated, is going to be done by the machine. One very important part which will drive this is traditional revenue management systems have relied on scheduled reports for rate shopping and competitive price intelligence, because the market was not very dynamic. So you would schedule reports and you would say 30 days out, 60 days night, let's get the competitive prices in twice a week, thrice a week. According to recent research done by Radiant Data Science Labs, in some competitive markets, especially around airport locations or downtown central business district locations, the rate changes have become as high as almost 10, 12 times a day. And traditional revenue management systems are not configured to it. So I think you really need to look for players who can give you dynamic pricing on the fly, because ultimately it's garbage in, garbage out. So if your competitive prices are old and not dynamic in real time, your RM systems can consume the real-time data, but you're not providing it the right feed. So that's going to change.
You make a very valid point, Sharad, Apurva, on that one. Obviously, a lot of players in the market, but I think the players who are actually continuously investing in their own research and development will hold the key to the future of this whole RMS space. Sharad, I want to hear from you as well on what are your thoughts on the role of RMS, especially in the current times, or maybe in the next 4 to 5 months specifically.
I don't know how many times would you have heard, or people at the panel, that data is obsolete, that it has no value anymore, and people bring to the table now, given that the demand levels are actually non-existent and may not come back to their original 2019 levels for a long time. And you know, to some degree, it has value. I mean, comparative data does not exist anymore because the environment has changed. But it will come back to its, if not glorious levels, it will come back to its optimal levels to some extent, where systems start exercising what they are constructed to do, which is to optimize revenues at all points of times and direct hotel teams to make better judicious decisions. In the short term, you have companies trying to reinvent or look at demand in a very different way. And that's where creation of demand actually will take precedence at all times. The more systems are dynamic, the more systems are able to navigate through these ups and downs and react accordingly. And the more data that they're able to provide, which is guiding hotels to say, you know what, I'm just not looking at the total occupancy. I want customer level data integrated in my decision making at some point so that I can make a better decision. I want geographic based data in my EEL system to say, you know what, I want to optimize some parts of demand at a certain time. That will change for sure. I don't know if companies are geared up to invest now in technology and change that in the next 4 to 5 months. I don't think so. That's going to happen because it costs a lot of money and nobody has cash. But in future, for industry to be prepared and for players like big players like Ideas, RateGain, and other companies that are also providing such technology, they will have to think through this and make their models much, much more dynamic. It also brings a question whether hotel companies are now at a point where they want to continue investing in systems as they have done traditionally, because they want to be owner and they want to lead their own destiny, Do they want to continue doing that, or they really want to go and depend on outsourced systems, because then it makes them a little bit more lean and efficient, rather than investing so much money in their own proprietary systems?
Absolutely, you make a very valid point, and investment definitely is a big question mark right now. So yes, there are things that we all want as revenue management function. I want to look at maybe 10 different other data points, but it's all comes down to will that investment happen or not. But having said that, even with the current data sets, I think revenue managers in general and the leaders on property, the leaders in the corporate business, I think we all need to kind of relook at what are, even in the current space, whatever data points we currently have today, are we making enough use of all of that? It's always good to ask for more, but are you still, even in the current space, are you still making an informed decision? I think that question always comes to my mind when I'm evaluating, the talent on property or talent in general in the industry. Angie, can we look at the results of our poll on the screen to see what people are thinking? So yes, I will use it, but I know more in current times on what's happening around me. So yeah, that's that's what our audience is saying. 69% of the people are saying that in the current times, you continue to work with the RMS, but somewhere you kind of have a more look and feel and understanding of what's happening in the market, which is true. The RMS currently doesn't know when the borders are opening up, so that's fine. Let's let's actually slightly change the topic, and I want to actually go back to the very, very interesting topic that Professor Kimes, you picked up the other day. So thank you for that. In one of the other virtual discussions that we were having on the roundtable, and the discussion was on why do I need revenue management? And Sharad, you kind of touched upon that topic slightly, and it's a real world question, right? I'm sure a lot of owners or organizations are looking at their manning structure now and asking, do I really need this person on the ground, considering I don't have revenue to manage? And I'll be true to that. I've heard this statement a couple of times. Now I know it's a wrong thought process, but I want to hear from you guys is where did we go wrong in positioning ourselves, in positioning our revenue management function? And Professor Kimes, I want to come to you first on this topic. You're bringing in the next generation of revenue managers into the industry. So where do you think we are going wrong, and what do we need to do, to make it work out differently?
I think we need to stop saying, let me show you my latest spreadsheet. That's a good start. I think that we have not done a very good job of communicating, and we have focused very much on, I know that many times revenue managers say, oh, I'm strategic. Well, we're not. And so I think that, revenue managers have become more and more tactical, more and more focused on inventory management, which is fine. But that's what the focus is. It's like, well, wait a minute. I think, the question of, well, if there's no revenue, why do I need a revenue manager? It's thinking of it as I'm managing inventory. Right now, that's not so much of an issue, right? Well, it is in a way, but it's different, but it's much more on the pricing. And then you get the other part, and this came up in our discussion a couple of weeks ago, is that the revenue management person, and this back to the focus on profitability, is able to do that analysis to say, well, yeah, that's, you could sell more that way, but you're going to lose money. And so you kind of be able to put the brakes on it. But I think that the disservice that we've done is to ourselves is we have not communicated very well, and we've been too tactical. And I think that if you're going, and if I was an owner or an asset manager, and I've got to cut costs, and so what value are you providing me? And we could go through and let me show you my spreadsheet to show you my value. That's not going to work. You've got to be able to think a little bit more strategically to get it. And that's, and that's not, I'm not meaning to, cut people down or anything like that. But but realistically, I think that's kind of what the major issue is.
Yeah, I think it's all about that positioning piece. Sharad, what's your call on that?
Over the years, on an average, for the last few years, I've probably interviewed 150 to 200 people annually for different positions in hotels. And the first question when a general manager would introduce this position to me would say, could you please review them for their technical skills? And I would be like, no, I'm actually not going to do that, because if somebody's been working for 3 to 4 years, I know technically they're sound, or probably more. And then we have our own proprietary uses of systems so people can get trained. What I'm really going to focus on are their strategic skills. Are they able to elevate their position and talk strategy in a room full of executives and lead a business? And I think that's where I completely agree with Professor Kimes. You know, the communicating piece of what really a revenue manager stands for in an asset, which is multi-million-dollar asset, and where are they building a story of revenues and profitability. So, you know, an asset manager is an asset manager with a very one-dimensional view, and a revenues manager can have a very three-dimensional view and say, you know, I want to create revenue streams in all areas, and I also want to look at profitability. Because if I'm not able to sell a piece of business, or at least if I'm not able to price a piece of business at a value that brings value eventually to the bottom line, then it's of no use. So, you know, hiding behind a system, or using spreadsheets and just always quoting data, those days are long gone. And, you know, that position has not evolved. And I believe a big part of that is our responsibility as industry leaders to change that narrative where we work and across the industry, and working with folks like HSMAI, try and influence what this position at a hotel level, at various other levels in the field could actually bring as value. And therefore, that story of a systems manager to a strategy manager, there you need to create a distinction. So because revenue management is so integrated with the systems part of it, the fallback position for revenue manager is always the systems. So, you know, somewhere the yield managers, what we used to call them before, need to become yield managers, and a revenues manager needs to be dissociated to some extent from the day-to-day managing of systems, because then you make that position a bit strategic. You ask them for more decision-making, you let them be business-led, you give them an active voice in decision-making, and also for them to lead different functions and bring them together, you know, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who have the right pulse when it comes to data, trends, green shoots, anything that you may want to see, you know.
No, that's absolutely a valid point, and then 200 interviews in a year is a pretty big number, and I 100% correlate to that, right? I mean, we get our standard sheets of interviewing people, and one of the questions that definitely comes in is around the whole technical piece. In fact, you know, in standard interview templates, I also used to have questions around, you know, tell me how good you are on your Excel skills. That's been the problem, because that insect is actually sitting in our mind as leaders, that this is what I want to hire. And I think that I 100% agree to that point. Till the time we as industry leaders are not going to change our perspective of what kind of talent we want in our teams, that is not going to change. So yes, it's very easy to maybe blame on the other side, but I think somewhere we also are part of that blame process to say, how do we change our perspective? Apurva, you also kind of work with, you know, so many hotels, hotel companies, and again, not just hotel companies, but you look at revenue management function more from that airline and car rental piece, and shipping companies also. How do you think we are different in the hotel business versus the way the other industries are treating revenue management as such? Where are we going wrong?
Sure. That's a very provocative question, Taran. And we are fortunate to work with RM leaders in airlines, car rentals, cruise ferries. And we also have exposure, although we don't directly work with them, from RM leaders who work in parking lots, who work in bowling alleys. So RM as a science is much beyond hospitality. And one of the most common things which has struck me when I speak with RM leaders is they're very good at their subject. And ideally, what are we trying to do? we are trying to maximize our revenue and with the most optimum mix of, everything which we can sell, right? So that's total revenue management. This should make you ideally the next step should be for the RM leader to be the revenue leader. So to grow into the chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer, and you don't see that happening. You see large chains, mid-sized chains, and most RM leaders continue being RM leaders, either because of their passion about the subject or because they're so important that the CEO doesn't want them to do any other role, but really focus on this role. But for me, I know I would love it if some RM leaders go beyond their remit and start getting more involved in distribution, in social media marketing. And from RM leaders, they actually become TRM leaders. And TRM basically means you're thinking about the whole P&L rather than just saying, functionally in my silo, I'm doing my job, but then, other things are outside my control. So would love to see more leadership from all the RM leaders globally. And this can really get the profession back into prominence and make it the go-to role where leaders from hospitality emerge.
Again, very valid points there. Sam, what are you doing in terms of, so we obviously touched upon what can be done, right? I want to hear from you on, as a regional company, as a regional brand from Rutana, there is obviously an element, you can hire whatever talent you have, but how are you working to kind of help them through that journey, right? So we want to make sure that people are being groomed towards their leadership competencies and their presentation skills, for example. Do you think the role of learning and development also plays, or training in general plays again a critical role when it comes to revenue management function? And how are you reflecting on that in your business today?
Taran, I think the importance you give to revenue managers should come from the top, and if you believe in it as a company and as a senior leadership, it will work well. And when you talk about strategic, how do we do it strategically instead of being a technical on the technical side? You need to ask from every revenue manager you have, at least to come up, as a GM or as a corporate at the corporate level, to come up at least with one thing which is different from the things you do every day. You look at data all day, you look at reports, you look at rate shopping, you look at revenue management system, but all of this is good, and you just keep on following what you do every day. But how many times did you come up with something which is new and innovative to put in place and do something different, which will result in more money or making more revenue? And this is how we need to challenge ourselves, and our team. It's not about, okay, check my rates online, check the forecast, close the classic room, check the revenue management system, do the overrides. But how many times did we really do in a month or in a week or in a year, when we created something new? And this is strategy, strategic doesn't mean like sitting in a meeting and making a big speech about how we can do things, and finally don't do anything. So it's really about putting something in place and, and move ahead with it, and that's it for me, I mean, we can have a chat for 10 minutes about this, but you need to have something in place and something different. And this is strategy, if you don't do it, you're not doing anything.
No, again, the word be strategic is sometimes overused, I guess, in any so-called one-on-one sessions or personal development sessions or coaching sessions. I'm sure, we have over 100 attendees right now. A lot of our attendees would have heard this thing, oh, I want you to be strategic. What does that really mean? I think you kind of pinpoint on that. One statement that obviously resonates with me, what Professor Kimes has used time and again, is geeks who can speak. That definitely goes at the background. But I think you make definitely a great point around, how am I going to think differently? Is it time for me to think about how can I create new revenues? What am I doing to generate new revenues? What can I do to be more creative? And I think that's the critical piece. Because if you're going to be doing, and that's a good message for our audience, if you're going to be doing what you are doing, you're going to be arriving at the same point every now and then, time and again, your results are going to be the same. So it's now time. We've used this word unprecedented times, but that also requires for you as revenue managers to do things which are unprecedented, right? And that's something which I would want all our audience members to kind of think through in revenue management in general. For the participants over here, for the audience, also do remember that you have a Q&A icon right below on your screen. If you have any question, please do type out your questions, and we will definitely try and answer that in the time now. Actually, I want to go back to an interesting question, which is around the pricing. We were talking about this earlier, and Sharad, you did talk about looking at the whole bundling piece. Apurva, you also mentioned that whole, bringing all your airport transfers and all inclusive meals and all of those things together. But there's an important question which says, I think it's asked by Abhishek Ray. So would it be important to look at bundling versus unbundling prices, because it needs to be a combination of the two, or perhaps, but with spending of consumers lowered, they would be actually looking at lower prices. So bundling obviously kind of increases the prices on the higher side. And I was just attending another session in Asia Pacific around the pricing piece, which also talked about the people still want to go with that whole yellow page approach, right? So when you want to think about hotels, you narrow down on your budget and you go to the OTA piece as their number one option, because it gives you results within that bracket. And then you just look at it, based on pricing. And then the second option is obviously the meta, and the third is actually the brand website. So if I'm to follow that approach, is there a risk for me if I over bundle too much of my stuff together on the pricing side? Apurva, why don't you answer that?
That's a very good question, and I wanted to thank Abhishek Ray for asking that. I think it totally depends on what segment of hotel are you in. So if you're a budget hotel, bundling might not work, because then you're going beyond the $60, $70 mark. If you're a luxury hotel or even a business hotel, most companies, and we've done a bunch of surveys, are very, very open to looking at a fully bundled package. We're also talking to corporate travel providers, business travel, and most of the companies are going back to their corporate travel providers, and their expectation is to see a more comprehensive package, because as corporate travel starts picking up, companies are really concerned that their employee will step out to get a meal or will end up taking a cab. So my recommendation is approach it at a rate plan level, and you will need both the map or the AP, or I don't know, maybe we need a new term for a rate which includes car pickup and many other things. But basically, it will depend on the segment of hotel you are in. And then finally, what do you want to do? What kind of amenities do you have? The second interesting thing which we are hearing is you have a lot of digital hotels, which means hotels which go down. Their go-to-market is starting with their own booking engine and their own app. And some of them now have almost 80% bookings coming in through their own app and own mobile app. And these are very large chains, more than 7,000-8,000 hotels. I'll not take names, but we work with at least 5 such chains which have started in the last 5 years and which now see more than 80% revenue coming from their own app and own website. And this really calls to question that, what can we do as, as brands and as hoteliers, which have been there in the industry for 50 years, 60 years, and why can't we make that move? So OTA business is not going to go away, but what can we do to drive brand.com even harder? And what can we do to really, really save those commissions and keep it with us?
Apart from investing the money in the brand website, which investment is the big problem right now.
Yeah.
I want to do a lot of campaigns, but if I don't have the campaign money, then invariably you kind of end up moving towards, the OTA side and, seeing what you can do from the OTA world. So fair point. But I think to answer, Abhishek, I think you got your answer. It's going to be a bundle approach. Look at your segmentation. and take your call. I think you can still use your unbundled prices to attract the customer, and then use your bundle pricing to provide the best ROI, because that is going to help you in the conversion process. So best of luck on that. Another interesting question, and this is again a very valid question coming in from Arun Kumar, based in Dubai. Trap question again. Actually, that's the other one. Arun has a question around education, and Professor, I'm going to come to you on this one. We again hire a lot of our revenue managers coming in from front office or reservations background. So the piece around the skill set which Sharad touched upon is kind of inbuilt into that, right? You've been very good with systems, therefore you become a revenue manager. But the question over here that Arun is asking is, do you think there are enough specialized education available in the market for revenue managers, and should revenue managers have more understanding of data science? So should our revenue managers be encouraged to take some independent courses on data science, on analytics, to kind of understand what that world is all about? It's not very easy to use those words very loosely, but I don't think I'm not sure if people understand the whole concept of data science and analytics.
I would encourage them to take less of that, to be contrary. I mean, I was kind of thinking back to what Sam said, and I'll get back to that in a moment, is that one of the things that I do in my classes, and Sharad probably remembers this from when we had when I guess many years ago, shall we say, when he was in my classes. I'm into grandma language, and so explain it to your grandma. And I mean, I got my course evaluations last week, and I had some students go, "But my numbers were right. Why did you keep bugging me about the way?" I was like, "Well, I mean, if you can't communicate it." And the other thing that I think is really important, and Sam kind of alluded to it, is think creatively. I mean, I had the most interesting conversation with a guy yesterday who runs a restaurant group, and they've got all sorts of constraints. And so, like, for example, 70% of his restaurants are in a downtown area in Singapore, and we're still kind of work from home. So there's not going to be any business. And he was sitting there, he's going, how am I going to make money? I mean, and I've heard that, I mean, and I guess it's also a pitch for my session coming up, but it's really interesting, because they're going, okay, how do I stay in business? And what are the ways I can generate revenue? That would be the sort of question I would ask somebody in an interview is, okay, let me just I mean, we got plenty of those situations out there right now, right? I mean, that's when you start to see a revenue manager. Okay, yes, I want them to know their basic data kind of stuff, but I'm not looking for somebody who's going to be is a specialist in that. If they happen to be a specialist in that, and then they could answer that question, how are you going to make me more money? That's the best. Right now, if they could answer, how can I make more money? And their analytical skills are in, I'm happy. I mean, I'm happier than someone who could say, let me show you, I've got the best model out there.
Yeah, and I think again, a valid point. It might be the best model, and the model might fail as well. But the fact that you are thinking creatively and you are taking that risk of let me try and do different, is going to hold a lot of value right now. So again, piece of advice to all our attendees over here: think differently, take risk. It's okay to fail. Again, if you fail tomorrow, tell your boss these are unprecedented times. It's okay. It's absolutely fine. You've heard this word too long now, too often.
Well, and then one other comment on that is that what I'm seeing is that a lot of and right now we have the hotels have mostly been closed, so we haven't really been forced that much with this, but the restaurants have, is they're discovering all these different revenue streams that they didn't even know that they had. And now, if they're able, when they're able to go back to normal, it's like, wait a minute, why didn't we think of that? Like hotels, I mean, doing doing delivery. Like, wow, never thought about that before. Is that a way? And so again, don't be afraid to fail, but also you might find some stuff you never even thought of before.
Yeah. Great discussion on that Q&A, and there are a couple of other questions which we'll definitely try to cover. In fact, there is one question that talks to one of the questions that I had already planned for the panel was, since we talked about cost cutting and in this part of the world, given the majority expats that we have in the revenue management function in Middle East, it is indeed a critical cost when you break down your P&L. Now, the question is COVID-19 and the after effects of this and on our industry going to make us think differently on how we run this function in particular. Is outsourcing revenue management the future? Majority of the chains, including we at IHG, and I'm aware about Marriott, Hilton, even Hyatt has some sort of a clustering format. But do you think this is successful, and is this the best way forward? Sam, I want to first hear your views on more from a regional brand point of view. What is your understanding and thought process around taking that revenue manager out from the property and bundling them up all together under one roof?
Karan, today we don't actually do it. So we have a revenue manager based at the hotel. So we have one revenue leader at each hotel. I'm in favor of having a cluster position. I think bringing people into one city or like one office, when you can cover 10, 12 hotels, you will have much more, you will use your time more efficiently. And you can always, to be honest, there is no right formula, to do it. Some companies had it completely remote. They don't see the hotels, they don't visit, they don't interact with anyone, only by phone or by Zoom meeting. Some people have done it, some companies have done it midway, like, okay, they can visit the hotel once a week. You need to think what is best for the company and what you want to put in place. There is no one single formula that you would say, yes, this is the way we should put everyone outside and we should do a big center and have everyone calling the hotels. It should be relevant to the number of hotels you have as a whole in a city, in a market, what your needs are. But yeah, clustering, yeah, I'm in favor. Today we don't do it. Probably we should start thinking about it. But we haven't really made a decision today of just removing everyone from hotels and putting them into one big office.
Sure. No, I completely get it. I think cost cutting alone shouldn't be the reason to do that. Cost cutting can be one of your triggers in the current times, that you at least are starting to think what else can be done, and therefore you start exploring those options. But that shouldn't be the only reason that you would pick up an outsourcing model versus a on-site model, because at the end of the day, what works for your property should be happening on the ground. Sharad, you spent again a good 14-15 years in the Hyatt journey. You've seen, and now you have that whole clustering piece as well in Middle East, as I know of. What's your experience? What works and what doesn't work?
So let me just say that when I started with the clustering project, the intention was not to save costs. In fact, it became more expensive for hotels to be part of the cluster, because we were trying to bring the best talent pool to run the cluster, and the thought was more on the strategy side rather than just the system functioning side. So I don't believe that clustering should have the traditional view of saving costs. So you're here to build revenues, create revenues, and manage revenues. It's an expensive position, and that's how it should be viewed. But coming back to your core question, whether the revenue management function can be outsourced or should become an outsourced function, I am split in my thought process as to how this needs to be addressed. And I think largely organizations that have a very strong revenue culture within their ecosystem will want to keep this position in-house and manage that position or be led by this position in future. And organizations that only view this as a systems-based position or a spreadsheet-based position have actually the right opportunity to outsource it, because then you don't want to have an expense sitting on your P&L, which is just giving you an update from a spreadsheet. So I think I'm in favor of both. I do see, and you know what, when you ask the reset for revenue management, I think this is pretty much what should happen. The systems part of it, where somebody just optimizing your data and optimizing the forecast that you have put in the system, that probably needs to be outsourced, where somebody can manage that and you don't need to have that expense in your P&L. But but you do need a strategic mindset. You do need a revenues manager managing all revenue streams. You need somebody that is commercially astute and can navigate between digital distribution and can actually guide the sales teams to say, this is where you need to go and find the business. And for God's sake, don't go and start pricing yourself lower, because it's not going to help anybody. But you definitely need the strategic mindset to exist for a business at the property level, or in a clustered function, or in a regional function, because then you can have the right discussions with the right stakeholders. But today's times have created an environment where the systems part of it can be outsourced, because it's otherwise the first question that owners ask is, what is there to optimize? Why do I need a system? Why do I need a revenue manager? And that conversation needs to change as well.
Great. I know, Professor Kimes, you have to go. I have one last question for you, which has actually come on the Q&A piece from Patrick Wimble. We've got audience all across Europe and Middle East now. What's the best piece of advice you can give now for young graduate level aspiring revenue manager who wants to get into the business? It's pretty tough out there. I think it's a very valid question right now in the industry. What's your message to the people? And you are teaching a lot of students. What's your message right now before you go for your next session?
I think be able to approach problems creatively, be able to answer that question: how am I going to be able to generate more money, make more revenue, or more profit? I mean, I think if you can do that, and then even better, if you're trying to break in, is show you can do it. And so it might not be you might not get that ideal job right when you graduate. You're probably not going to, but try it out. I mean, whether you're even, I guess I'm getting you guys all free labor, but I mean, whether you're volunteering or you're helping out a small operator or something like that, you've got something, you're going to be developing a lot of skills that you're going to be able to transfer to others in the future. And I think that that's something that's, well, let me tell you how I can generate more money. Well, show me. Let me show you. I did it. That can't be replaced. And that's something that's going to help you in the future. One last comment is that my former students who worked through SARS, obviously not as rough as they said, they're still thinking, they find themselves asking the same questions that they were asking in 2003. And they said that you're working through COVID, their experience from SARS was so helpful to them because they knew what to do. And one of them is the fundamental question is, how am I going to make more revenue? I mean, okay, this is shut down. How do I quickly transfer to something like that? That's back again. This is valuable experience. I mean, it's the kind of experience I think we all prefer we were not getting. But I mean, it's back to the Winston Churchill quote of "Don't waste a crisis." This is one of those times. Thank you, and I'll see all of you in hopefully in about 5 or 10 minutes. Thanks,
yes,
Taryn.
In the next session.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, bye.
Thank you very much. We do have another last 10 minutes for our session, so we'll let Professor go. She's getting on ready for her next F&B revenue management session. So again, all the audience members, if you want to learn more around the F&B revenue management, please join her next upcoming session as well. I have a couple of other questions that obviously come up as well. And Apurva, back to you around, we talked about, again, pricing piece, and you can go ahead and tell people that do not drop your pricing, and we've been saying that for a very long time. It's not that, you're talking about the subject just because it's COVID-19. Now, the reality is that in today's time already, from the data points that I've seen, RateGain and some of the other companies, the benchmark rates in itself are on an average, 30 to 40% below last year levels. And then over and above that, you have a lot of promotions again in the market. Now, I don't want to drop my pants, but my neighbor is dropping pants. So what do? That trap is the one which kind of keeps us busy and occupied, because I'm not looking just at what I'm going to do, but I'm more interested in doing or understanding what the other neighbor is doing. What's your advice to the revenue people on the ground to avoid that trap and to ensure that you're not unnecessarily dropping your pricing right now?
So it's a very tough question, Taran, in the sense that these are unforeseen situations, right? Traditionally, revenue managers always relied on historical perspectives. What was the canvas last year? What was the seasonality? How did competition react? What are the events which happened? Now it's all been set to zero. So there is no data. You're flying blind. The GPS is not working, and you have to get to your level of profitability. So what we are advising hotels is drop your pricing by 50-60% or more. Your recovery is going to take almost 2 to 3 years. Right now, we are saying you should be able to get back to 50-60%, even 70% of where you were last year within 9 months. But if you drop your prices by 50%, then that recovery goes to 2 to 3 years, right? The second thing is we are telling people to be very, very watchful of competitive prices. You can't ignore it because ultimately it's a free market. And we launched a product in Feb this year, which actually HSMAI rewarded as the most disruptive rate shopping product called Market Drone, which does real-time alerts on your iWatch or on your tablet on competitive prices. So I think being on top of your real-time rates is going to be really important. And third thing is, rather than giving a discount, can you add something as an extra benefit? And could be, like location-based per same floor. So the demand for such rooms may become high. As such, can you start pricing rooms by location even inside that hotel? Traditionally, it's happened in villa hotels or by room types and inclusions. But in today's context, maybe a room far away from the lobby, which was usually least preferred, would become the most requested one, demanding a higher price. Similarly, to manage cash flows, you could be launching some kind of coupons, bonds, because cash in hand is going to be the king. And most revenue managers will be encouraged by their GMs and bosses to say that, what can you do to get me the revenue today? That's the hotel open and our colleagues in versus getting furloughed. And I think it is going to be very, very important, and just discount 50%, but build in amenities to add value, and also really, really bring in the health and safety and hygiene features, which give the people that, hey, I'm paying 20-30% extra, but at least, I'll be safe.
That piece around pricing your room away from lobby or closer to lobby and things like that. Yes, a lot of results seen as well, talking about attribute pricing. I think that's the whole attribute pricing concept. Yes, in your minds, you can either wait to say, oh, can my RMS manage that attribute pricing? But in reality, and I can definitely say that in reality, the way just we price our rooms and products, just because you have your 10th floor and all rooms are superior rooms or deluxe rooms, whatever you call them, but maybe it's time to again, to that reset button piece that we were talking about, think differently. Do I need to price my 7th floor rooms in a different way? Do I need to call my deluxe rooms versus, superior rooms? I need to call my rooms far from elevator something else, just to make sure I build in those elements of attribute pricing and do something.
And then rooms away from the lift and elevators could be priced, more expensive versus closer to the lift.
Yeah. Very valid point. Angie, I think we are almost there from our time point of view. Yeah, we've just maybe have another minute to go. Maybe a quick last rapid fire round.
I just add to what Apurva was saying, Tarandeep, with regards to pricing, that hotels should really concentrate on their positioning in the market, whether it's a local positioning, it's a brand positioning, or it's a competitive positioning. If you find hotels, if the big chains start dropping prices, think about the regional chains and think about the local hotel operators and where they would go. And if hospitality has to learn any lesson, and of course, COVID-19 is a very exceptional event, and I hope it never happens again in our lifetimes or ever. Hospitality is always the first to suffer because people stop traveling, and that's our bread and butter. And somewhere hotel operators are tempted to drop prices to attract people back to their properties. You don't see that happening in other industries. And if you want to stick your guns out there, focus on the positioning, focus on the value that you offer to the customers, and focus on your messaging out there. Because once you start focusing on these things, you will find that the need to just lower prices for the heck of it will disappear. And if you start focusing on segments largely and geographies, it'll make much more sense than just having one price out for everybody. And I know that we can't have, I mean, we would rather have rate parity, and I'm not talking about the unqualified price out there that should be based on positioning. I'm talking about just your segmented price or customer-based price that you try and negotiate with different operators.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Sharad. And with that, I think we will almost come to an end of our session. Thank you very much once again for being part of this panel. Thank you, audience, for joining this session. There are plenty of other sessions happening simultaneously between Asia Pacific, Middle East, and now I think Europe sessions are also going live. Please continue to enjoy and learn from all of these sessions. And later in the evening, I think the US session will also go live. Thank you once again. Thank you all for joining in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tarandeep. Thank you for hosting.
Bye-bye.